Everyone, and welcome to today's virtual event spotlighting the law school's clinics, innovation, and impact. My name is Megan Watson, Senior Associate Director of Alumni Relations, and we're so glad you've joined us today. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few upcoming alumni events. Reunion Weekend, taking place May 1st through the 3rd, is just a few weeks away, 18 days, but who's counting? We're excited to welcome you all back to campus for a fun-filled weekend. Our next virtual program will be held on May 19th and will feature a conversation between Dean Chilton and Professor Mark Templeton on litigating for climate and energy justice. Our upcoming Meet the Dean events will take place in San Francisco and in Palo Alto on May 27th and 28th. If you're tuning in from the West Coast today, we'd love to see you there. And lastly, we're planning to host a Supreme Court review virtual event on June 2nd. More details to come, so please stay tuned. You can find more information about these events and other events on the alumni section of our website, or you can email us at alumni@law.uchicago.edu. With that, I'm pleased to turn the program over to Dean Chilton and Professor Zunkel.
Thanks, Megan. And thanks everyone for being here for the latest in our series of virtual events that we've been having throughout the year. Now, the topic that we're going to talk about today is the law school's clinical education program. For our older alumni that are on the chat, I think one of the things that has changed the most about our law school over the last roughly 20 years has been the expansion and the growth of the clinical program. So we've both expanded the number and types of clinics that we offer and the number of clinical faculty that work within those clinics to create new opportunities for our students to be engaged in experiential learning, where they directly work on actual matters and cases and get hands-on experience firsthand to help teach them in a hands-on way how to be better lawyers and more successful lawyers. Now, one of the things that I think is most exciting about our clinical education program is that it, I think, has a distinct philosophy and approach that's just a little bit different than our peers. And then I think provides better experience for our students. Now, I don't want to step on my colleague Erica's presentation, so I'll let her describe a little bit more about exactly what makes it unique and special. But I'm joined here today for this conversation with my colleague Erica Zunkel. Now, Erica, in a past life, was a public defender before joining the law school in 2012. At first, Erica was one of the clinical professors of law in the Federal Criminal Defense Clinic. Erica is now the director of the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Clinic. In addition to her role running her own clinic, Erica is also overall the director of the Clinical and Experiential Education Program for the law school. So in other words, she oversees all of the clinics and their operations, a role that she stepped into just this last summer. All right, with that, I'd like to welcome Erica and for a presentation about the clinics. Actually, before I do that, one note. So Erica has some slides and a presentation for us. The Q&A function is open, and so if anyone would like to start asking questions, please go ahead, and afterwards we can take questions from the audience, any questions or aspects about Erica's presentation or our clinics or experiential learning programs more generally. All right, Erica.
All right, is that showing up for everybody?
Working for me.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Adam. I'm excited to have the opportunity to spotlight the clinics, engage in some conversation, and then answer questions from the audience. First, I wanted to start by giving an overview of our various clinics and some of the history of the clinical program before talking about where the program is today and where we're headed. So today, we have 15 different clinics within 8 distinct, what we call law firms, so operate sort of as independent entities. And then we have 2 supervised field placements. And all of these clinics represent a really diverse range of both transactional and litigation opportunities. And all of us in the clinics are really operating with the overarching goal of providing gold standard representation to our clients, and then teaching our students the practical ins and outs of legal practice at the same time as we are doing our very best for our clients. So in the Mandel firm, there are 8 separate clinics within the legal aid organization, and all of the clinics in Mandel have a longstanding mission to represent and serve underserved communities in Chicago and beyond. So Mandel students spend tens of thousands of hours providing pro bono legal services to underserved communities um, around Chicago and throughout the country. So during this year, as I've stepped into the director role, I have learned more about the history of the Mandel Legal Aid Clinic, which is really the foundation for the clinical program that we have today. The Mandel Clinic started as more or less a pop-up shop in the basement of the law school. And back then it was affiliated with Chicago Legal Aid. So there were lawyers who were handling individual cases with law students who were volunteers in the clinic. There were no formal clinical faculty members, and students did not receive any credit for the work that they were doing. We have come a long way since then in obvious ways. We are no longer in the basement, thankfully. We have a full roster of clinical faculty members, and students obviously are getting credit for the work that they're doing in the clinics. In 2008, the Mandel Legal Aid Clinic celebrated its 50th anniversary. And I found the whole symposium that was held. This is a still of Emily Buss, who was on a panel during that symposium. And it's well worth a watch if you have an interest in both seeing how far our clinical program has come since the 50th anniversary, as well as thinking through, considering, discussing some of the questions that we continue to think about with respect to clinical education and its place in educating our students. So since 2008, we have expanded, as Dean Chilton said, our clinical offerings in both litigation and transactional work. The ABA actually recently instituted a requirement that every student complete some type of experiential learning credits before graduation. Of course, should students choose to earn those experiential learning credits in the clinic, we really want to have those offerings be the best that they can be. Dean Chilton talked about some of the things that I think make our clinics really unique and distinctive. And I think that really centers on the approach we take to our cases and the level of responsibility that we give to our students. So this slide is courtesy of my colleague, Mark Templeton, who's the director of the Abrams Clinic. And it's a slide that I really love because it just does a great job of capturing what we do, and I think how we do things, as Adam said, a little bit differently than our peers. So if you were in a UChicago clinic as a student, you have high responsibility in the clinic, and you are generally working on a case that is of high complexity. I think that at other schools, you might have very high student responsibility in a case, but maybe lower on the complexity scale. And likewise, you might have a very highly complex case with lower student responsibility. My colleagues and I, we talk a lot about why we take the cases that we take, how we think through our approach to case selection, but also how students, how the cases that we choose are the best cases for students to learn from. And I really believe that the model of high student responsibility and high complexity is the best way to teach students to be excellent lawyers, and to teach them about judgment. I think judgment is one of those things that we have to be good lawyers, and it's something that's really not taught in the classroom. I don't think it can really be effectively taught in the classroom, and it's only once you start to dive into cases and think about how the arguments you're making are going to resonate with a particular judge, how you can best represent your clients, how you can handle strategic bumps in the road, that you really do begin to develop judgment. So you can see this dual complexity and responsibility in some of our recent work in both our litigation clinics and our transactional clinics. So I want to start with talking about some highlights in the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic. In a recent case, the Abrams Clinic filed an amicus brief in a Ninth Circuit case that challenges 3 climate-related executive orders. And the clinic's involvement in this case came up in a unique way. They had former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor for International Climate Policy, John Podesta, come to their clinic seminar, which is a part of all of our clinics. And he shared, I think it's somewhat informally, that he hoped to contribute his expertise to this particular case in the form of an amicus brief. And so Professor Templeton saw a really unique opportunity for his students to get involved in a high-profile Ninth Circuit case. So a team of 9 students was assembled, joined forces to draft and file the amicus brief over winter break last year, alongside Professor Templeton and Abrams Fellow Alex Mishko. And Professor Templeton's quote here just talks about the extraordinary contributions of our students in doing this work. Next, these are some cases that are very near and dear to my heart. This is 3 clients of my clinic who my students and I secured clemency and immediate release for from President Biden. They were all serving life sentences under outdated laws. So the sentencing laws that applied to our clients' cases changed in 2018. But Congress did not make those changes retroactive. So that meant that our clients were sitting in prison, serving life sentences, knowing today that if they were sentenced under the laws today, they would be free and they would be home with their families. So clemency was the avenue that led to our clients' release, but these cases represented just so much work that my students spearheaded to pursue release at the district court level, and broader advocacy that really focused on the injustice of our 3 client situation, as well as many others who were similarly situated. Next, turning to the Federal Criminal Justice Clinic, about a month ago, the FCJC's work to expose problems with stash house reverse sting operations was featured on Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. I love this picture of Professor Siegler with the background of the FCJC's work highlighted as John Oliver is talking. It's so wonderful to see this recognition for the FCJC's work, because this was work that the clinic did for years. Generations of clinic students worked on these cases and secured really remarkable results for individual clients, as well as bringing broader changes to the legal standards for bringing discriminatory policing claims and shutting down these operations around the country. So next, turning to highlights from some of our transactional clinics. The Institute for Justice's clinic on entrepreneurship continues to do really groundbreaking work to support low-income entrepreneurs in Chicago. They are assisting them with navigating a lot of regulatory and administrative hurdles that make being a low-income business owner in Chicago challenging. One thing that they do every year is something called the Southside Pitch, which is Director Kragor, Associate Director Gritchen, and then all of their students really work up this event where up-and-coming businesses pitch their businesses to a citywide audience and a panel of judges for the chance to win cash prizes. So this is a picture of the 2025 first place winners, a vegan ice cream shop in Bridgeport. So if that's your thing and you're in Chicago, check out Runaway Cow. And then finally want to spotlight the Housing Initiative Transactional Clinic directed by Professor Jeff Leslie. In the housing clinic, students serve as deal lawyers to bring affordable housing and mixed-use development projects to fruition. They've recently worked on several really impactful projects across Chicago. Some of their work was recently highlighted on the Law Clinic's website, and there's a really great picture of one of the clinic's students actually at a deal signing in downtown Chicago. So I think just zooming out a bit, all of these cases and projects show just how impactful the work of our clinic students is, both to clients that they are representing and to their own growth as lawyers. Okay, so looking ahead, I think that this is a really, really exciting time for our clinics. Um, the interest in our clinics is very, very high. About 75% of our graduates enroll in a clinic at some point during their time here. And you can see that in the last 10 to 12 years, that number has remained fairly steady. And you can see that that around the time we added several different clinics, including the corporate lab, the federal criminal justice clinic, and the Abrams clinic, and that was between roughly 2008 and 2011, a much greater percentage of our students were able to enroll in clinics. So we've done a very good job of meaningful clinic opportunities. Now, part of the reason that I think we've been able to do that is because many of our clinics are operating at a higher faculty to student ratio than I think is the norm in clinical legal education. That norm is generally an 8-to-1 faculty to student ratio. And you can see here in this slide that many of our clinics are over that faculty student threshold. And I think it's helpful to think about, where we are in relation to some of our peer schools. So Yale and Stanford, which have similar student populations to us, you can see that that at least at Yale, at Stanford, they have more clinics or more faculty or both. And Stanford actually advertises a 4-to-1 faculty to student ratio. So where do we go from here? As I said, I think it's a very exciting time in the clinics. I'm really grateful for Dean Chilton's support of the clinics, engagement with the clinics, and being a thought partner about how to make our clinics really the best that they can be. So things that we are thinking about is how to do smart expansion of our clinics. That includes making sure we have a diversity of offerings, both subject matter types and then types of core work that the clinic does, so that everyone who is interested in doing a clinic can do one. We also want to think about increasing capacity in individual clinics that already exist, especially those where there is one faculty member, where that faculty member is in essence operating as a solo practitioner. As we're thinking about a smart expansion, we want to be very vigilant to maintain what we think are the distinctive qualities of UChicago clinical education, maintaining the rigor, maintaining the impact that we're having. And so that means continuing to take complex cases and giving our students a lot of responsibilities within those cases. And then as the world is doing higher education, the University of Chicago and the law school, thinking about AI, thinking about how we can use clinical education to be leaders in training our students to use AI effectively, to help our clients access justice, and ways that AI can help that, while also continuing to focus and teach our students both the soft and hard skills that are foundational to being a good attorney. And I hope those will, even in an age of AI, remain things that are very important and are taught well in the clinics. So before turning it back over to Dean Chilton, I will say another thing we really want to do is to cultivate the very vibrant clinic alumni community. I love hearing from alums. I know my colleagues love hearing from their alums. And we want to make sure that we can bring everyone together. So we are going to have our first ever clinics alumni reception. It'll be on November 10th in Chicago. So a bit far out, but for those of you who are in Chicago, we really hope you'll mark your calendars and join us for that. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dean Chilton.
All right, thanks, Erica. All right, I have a few questions that I wanted to ask before we go into it, some questions from the Q&A from the audience, but please go ahead and everyone in the audience, go ahead and enter any questions into the Q&A option. Now, to start, as the slide showed, and it was great that you had data to back this up, that we went from 20 years ago, 30% of our graduates having participated at some point in a clinic to now over 75% every year. So just a massive increase in the role that the clinics play at the law school. And I think one thing that this law school had thought is that we pride ourselves of having the best in-classroom instruction. And so if you take elements of the law here or contracts or antitrust or con law, you're going to get a professor at the top of their game that's trying, focused, and really give you a high quality experience. And so the view had been that if we're going to do clinical education, we're going to do it the right way and make sure that it's equally rigorous, equally intellectual, et cetera. And which is why I love the slide that you showed from Mark Templeton, this idea of the complexity on one axis and the student involvement. And the other is the philosophy that helps accomplish that. And as you said, some law school clinics, the model at other places is to have a lot of like pretty low level legal tasks where you just take a lot of them and you give every student the same bail hearing or something like this. And so you're trying to churn through the lowest level of legal services. Or some law schools have used clinics instead of having sort of dedicated clinical faculty as a way to attract star faculty. You say, oh, come to our law school and we'll create a vehicle for you to try to get Supreme Court arguments for yourself, right? And call that a clinic. And that's not really what we do here, in that it's trying to get the students these opportunities to stand up in court or to be engaged in advocacy work, policy work, deal work, as you described. So here's my question, though, to build this up. How is that possible in practice? How are you able to, in an educational setting, actually give the students this like complex work as opposed to just sort of falling apart and not doing a great job for the clients when the students play such a key role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that it's hard. I would not profess to say it's the easiest model of clinical education for the supervising faculty. And I think sometimes for students as well, because it really pushes faculty and it really pushes students. And I think that's where real learning happens, when you have those challenges. So I think that within, or at least the way that I think about it is, when I'm taking a case, does it fit the mission of Mandel and the work that the Criminal and Juvenile Justice Clinic has always done? And that's been focused on young people and this cohort of emerging adults, so 18 to 24-year-olds. I think the benefit of taking a case that is complex is the student learning piece. And it's really taking that case and starting with the case at the very beginning and then being able to see it all the way through. So I think if you're taking cases that are more discrete, where you may be doing a suppression hearing or you're doing a bail hearing, you don't really see the entire picture. And I think that when you're in practice, you're going to, generally speaking, be starting a case on the ground floor with a client or a business or whoever you're representing, and then you're going to be seeing that case through. And so I think you see in that model where everything builds on what you've done at the beginning of the case. So in my cases, it's a lot about, you have a client, you're representing a client zealously. That starts the first time you meet that client, the impression you make on them, and then you're working up that relationship over time, and you see how the trust and the goodwill built up with clients helps over the course of the case. So that's how I think about that question.
Got it. Okay, so one potential drawback of our approach relates to just something that you just said, which is, if you have these really discrete things, the suppression hearings, the bail hearings, they can sort of begin and end over the course of a semester, a quarter, et cetera, or at least an academic year. And so the students can work on it. Whereas, for instance, as you pointed out, things like the stash house cases or some of the more complex litigation that the clinics have worked on, it's taken years. Like these are big projects that are require new students to come into the clinic and cycle through them without. How does that work? Has that been a hindrance to the continuity of the clinic's work, or are you able to make it work? And if so, how do you guys do it?
Yeah, I think we are able to make it work. It does present the challenge of integrating new students and that's why we spend a lot of time, like, we encourage students to, take really good notes and leave their work product. And we have clinic students write handoff memos so that a student can pick that up and kind of see where the case is. I see the value in that. And as Allison Siegler has shared the news of the FCJC's work being highlighted on John Oliver, it allows her to reach out to the entire cohort of FCJC students who worked on this and really feel like you all in the work that you did over the course of 1 or 2 years or over a summer, it built into this really big thing that has had so many impacts, not just on individual clients, but also on sort of the broader discourse and about the law. So I think students appreciate being part of something bigger, and sometimes the longer term projects in clinic, you do get that feeling of like you're part of a community of students who have worked on these matters. And we do try to keep our students posted on what we're doing and the results of these big sort of cases. So I don't see it as a hindrance.
Okay, so our students, like all law students at top law schools, they go do some form of internship after their 1L summer, again after their 2L summer. So they have some, legal experience that's sort of built into their 3 years of law school through these 2 summers.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that the students get from participating in a clinic in their second or their third year that's different than what they would get like during their 1L summer?
I think I'm going to go back to the slide,
Yeah.
Mark Templeton's slide. I do think and another piece. So I think it's working on complex matters and having a lot of responsibility on those matters. I think the other piece is very close supervision. So we're able to, because we are not taking a massive number of cases, we're able to work very closely with our students on all aspects of a case. So if there's writing a legal brief, you may do that at your 1L firm. You're probably not getting super intensive feedback on like, structure and within, line edits to an individual section of the brief. And so I think that it's very, very, very hands-on. That my view is that all the skills you're learning in clinic are very transferable to when you walk in the door after you've graduated. You're walking into that firm and you can say, here are all the different things that I've done. And also students, I think legal writing is so important. And I think clinics do a really good job of intensely supervising the legal writing process and helping students improve their legal writing.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this is one thing I think about this, which is there are some student jobs that they do at, over their 1L summer that are truly fantastic, where they are like supervising them, giving them legal experience, marking up their memos, giving them opportunities to participate in a deposition or hearing, or the kinds of things they do in the clinic. But a lot go sit in an office and watch someone else do a hearing and then go to lunch.
Yeah.
And so, there's just this very uneven quality to the experience of
Yeah.
internships, whereas like we know with the clinics that like what they're getting, the kinds of experiences they're having, and it feels that perhaps the best summer experiences might compete, but certainly
Yeah.
the floor is, the variance is just way higher
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
agree with that.
All right. One other topic I wanted to ask you about that you alluded to in the goals section, and after this, I'll go to some of the questions that have built up in the Q&A, is how you think about the role of clinical and experiential education changing in the world of AI, which you mentioned as a goal. Now, I'll say one thing that I've heard a lot in the last year while traveling around and talking to alumni and law firm and people about changes to the legal profession is people are very concerned about people think there's still going to be a role for like the subject matter expert, this truly skilled lawyer. robots aren't going to be talking in court anytime soon or be the
Hmm.
last set of eyes on a complex deal. However, for first and second year associates, maybe there's just going to be less demand for some of the skills that they provide. And so, in my eyes, this had been one reason that it might be that experiential legal education is even more important to be able to say we produce students that are, to the extent anyone's ever practice ready at the time that they leave law school, relatively more practice ready, let's say.
Hmm.
How do you think about how the clinic might be able to do that, or um, either by directly using AI or not using
Yeah.
AI and just building up the skill curve?
Yeah. I think both are important. I think being able again to walk into a workplace where at a big firm, there's going to be a class of attorneys, and I think being able to say that I've done, I've taken a deposition. Like I have been the one to take that deposition. I have been the one to stand up in court and make an argument. I think I think the opportunities that our clinics give are going to give our graduates a chance to stand out among a group of highly talented lawyers. So they're coming in more like as a third year associate, and some of the things that they've done where they might not do until 5 years in. I think that they will be, my hope is that they would be the ones to be on the teams that are going to be doing the more complex work, and they can say, don't just take my word for it that I think I'll be good at this. Like this is something that I've actually done before. I think the other piece is clinical faculty understanding, having a very deep understanding of how AI can help our work, and what students are going to be, how our students are going to be able to use AI, even if they're not going to be in this, this sort of the subject matter domain of the clinic. Um, and so I think that's just going to be a work in progress, for clinical faculty using those tools in clinic, using them in conjunction with students, figuring out what works, staying on top of that, so that we can help our students navigate that. And hopefully they'll be able to have both the proficiency in how to use AI to be really helpful to wherever they're going to be, and that places clients. And then also continuing to teach those skills that are going to, I think, distinguish UChicago graduates from other people.
All right, great. I'm going to start moving into some of the questions from the Q&A, which we now have quite a few built up. First, to start, to what extent is the activities, the matters that you're working on, Chicago focused, Southside's focused, Illinois focused, or national in reach? What's the sort of way to think about the kinds of topics that you're working on?
I think most of them have, most of our clinics are focused on Chicago or Illinois more broadly. I think there's occasionally work that's done in different places and jurisdictions, but we have a strong commitment to working in Chicago and trying to serve communities here. And I think also on the South Side, in particular, that's an area of focus for all of us, to the extent we
Yeah.
can incorporate that.
Yeah, and let me add to that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, for instance, a lot of the clinics, like your clinic, the criminal juvenile justice clinic, has partners here on the South Side in Chicago that you work with to identify clients and cases
Yep.
and matters and to partner with in a variety of ways. And you mentioned like the IJ clinics, their Southside Pitch program, or the Innovation Clinic does work incorporating local businesses. Now, one thing though is that a number of our clinics that move into doing more impact litigation or national policy work, it seems like it often starts with something that was happening locally. And for
Yeah.
instance, one example that comes to mind is the Stash House litigation that you were referencing earlier from the federal criminal defense clinic that started with cases here in Chicago, in the south
Hmm.
side of Chicago, but then it challenged a policy that the ATF and the federal government was using across the country. So my understanding is that that led to the policy of using this form of stash house soft entrapment being
Yeah.
stopped as a policy nationwide, but it started out as a Chicago level issue before it then grew into this.
Yeah. Yes.
All
Yes.
right.
That's all accurate.
All right. Next question. Tell us about who directs these clinics. So, what is the faculty like, their background, what's their role at the law school, full-time people, part-time people? What can you say about
Yeah. So there are certain ranks of clinical faculty members, so full clinical faculty, associate, and assistant clinical faculty. We are on a different sort of tenure track than doctrinal faculty. We don't have tenure as the university thinks of it, but something of clinical tenure, presumptively renewable contracts. Many of us were public interest lawyers before becoming clinicians. And that generally in the whatever area that our clinic is in, we have expertise in that area. I practiced for about 8 years before coming here to take a fellowship in the Federal Criminal Justice Clinic, and I feel like it's really important to have that practice experience if you're going to teach your students how to be lawyers. And of course, then once you're here, you develop a lot of a litigation experience in Chicago and around Chicago. Many of our clinics, as I mentioned, are clinics, or some of our clinics are these solo practitioner clinics. So it's one individual person within the Mandel Clinic directing the clinic. Some clinics have another faculty member. Some clinics have fellows. I think a goal is to try to bring more fellows to the law school, both to clinical fellows to train people to go out and run clinics, and also help us with some of our capacity issues in the clinic and be able to offer more broadly offer clinics.
How many hours do the students have to participate in order to graduate, or like what's the number of hours for a clinical experience?
So it really ranges, which I think gives students a lot of flexibility. So students have 16 credits that they can use towards clinical and experiential learning. So 16 is the cap. It's not, there's a 9 credit cap per clinic. So students can take a clinic ranging from doing 1 credit, which is about 4 hours a week, to 3 credits, which is 12 hours a week. So you can dip your toes into a clinic if you want to by taking it for 1 credit, or you can really do a deep dive if you're taking it for 3 credits.
Yeah, that's right. And exactly as Erica said, I think the students vary a lot, and that some students, it really defines like their 2L and 3L year, that they're doing a ton of clinical hours and a lot of pro bono hours on top of that. And other students will take it as sort of one course among in 1 credit, 1 time, smaller.
Yeah.
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 Right.
And some clinics have a preference for students remaining in for the year just so that they can see, cases through, but other clinics don't have that requirement.
All right. I'm going to group 2 questions together that I think have a similar answer. First question is, can 1Ls participate in the clinics? And then question 2 is, what are the opportunities over the summer to get involved in the clinics?
So 1Ls, unfortunately, cannot formally participate in clinics. I think and that's true, I think, of almost all law schools.
Yeah.
With the goal being that your first year, you're really focused on getting these doctrinal classes. You have some more variety when you're in your spring quarter. So the first time that students can be in a clinic is after they're done with their 1L year. We hire usually roughly 25 summer interns, so rising 2Ls. And I think that that's a really great way to get involved in the clinics, see what the clinics are all about. As we talked about a little earlier, have a really substantive experience that first summer after your first year. And then if you are working in a clinic for the summer, you can continue to work in that clinic during the academic year.
So, as Erica said, we hire 25 students is summer interns within the clinical program. Those include a lot of people that have just finished their 1L year.
Yep.
So that's the first time they can get involved. But during the 1L core of the the academic year, we keep them focused on
Yeah.
contracts, elements, torts, property, etc. These kinds of classes. The one thing I'd say though is the 1L legal research and writing program, which runs all year long. It doesn't have a clinical component, but it has an experiential component in that they go through like a moot court experience at the end of the year and some things like that. And so there's they get exposed to some of the kinds of things that the clinics do, although they're
Yeah.
not directly enrolled in them. All right. Do the clinics have fellowships or other positions for recent law school graduates?
We do. So several of our clinics have fellows, rotating fellows. So the Abrams Clinic, for example, the Global Human Rights Clinic, where those positions are generally filled by graduates with 2 to 4 years of experience and an interest in clinical teaching. I think those are fantastic. That's how I came to the law school. So I think that those are really, really great opportunities, and really hope that we'll be able to expand the clinical fellow program.
Yeah, and let me just note the so as many of you know, the people that teach our legal research and writing program, which is the Bigelow Fellows, and for instance, I started here as a Bigelow Fellow, and many of our faculty did. That's the sort of standard on-ramp to getting a job on the doctrinal faculty, the research faculty of a law school. Is you do a fellowship at a top school, you get some experience teaching, mentorship on your own writing and research. And increasingly that's true within people that end up working as their career in clinical education, that they start as a
Mm-hmm.
fellow at a top law school. And one of the ways that I think that we're able to expand the impact for our current students, but also spread this sort of like University of Chicago-ness and thinking, is by having people that have come here, been a fellow within one of our clinics, spend 2 years or so doing that, and then go off to other clinics. And so one example that comes to mind, I believe this is true, is that, for instance, one of the fellows that was in our Abrams Environmental Law Clinic then went to
Mm-hmm.
run that clinic at Northwestern Law School. And I actually think they've
Yes.
placed fellows running a number of clinics around the country that then take what they learn here, just like the Bigelows that go off and teach at other law schools. I think take a little bit of this school's culture and values with them when they do, which has been
Yeah.
part of why I think we're both hope to expand the fellow program as something that we're focused on.
Yes,
All right.
definitely.
All right. Next question. So there's a couple of questions that relate to the access to justice gap, AI, and also the AI lab. And
Mm-hmm.
we did one of these sessions in the fall a few months ago with Kimball Parker, who runs the AI lab. And as I think you know, he created this tool to with the students over the course of the class to help people that are engaged in landlord-tenant disputes lease-wise. So you can
Mm-hmm.
upload your lease, you can ask questions. How do I get my deposit back? Am I allowed to extend? Can they evict me? And then get sort of documents. Are there ways to scale what the clinic's doing or to engage with this more directly that we might be able to impact our increase on the access to justice problem by working with AI or the AI lab specifically, or anything like this? I guess is the thrust of the questions on this topic.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I want to think about more. I do think that the work that the AI lab is doing, like landlord tenant, is a really good area to try to build out access to justice tools. I think in some ways the model of complexity and the way that we think about our cases, I think we'd have to think carefully about how to try to introduce AI to like scale within the existing work that we're doing. I do think that AI has a lot of promise for closing access to justice gaps. I think the thing that I worry about sometimes with that is making sure that people are getting high quality advice, and that they're able to engage with that in a meaningful way. That said, there are so many people who are looking for legal help and legal representation that we have to turn away, that I think thinking through how we can do that will be important going forward for sure.
All right. One of the questions is that we've been focusing on the impact on students' learning, students' experience, how we train lawyers. But of course, you representing actual clients, and part of what we're trying to teach the students is that the client comes first. How do you balance these things about what's best for the clients and what's best
Mm-hmm.
for the students' education? And are there times where any part of that tension gets in the way, and that either there's student-centered metrics that push you in some direction away from client service?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think all clinical faculty, we have the overarching um, duty of being zealous advocates to our clients, and so we need to make sure that we're doing right by our clients, you know, first and foremost. And I think if they're on equal planes, like would this be a good opportunity for the students, and will the clients be well represented? We say absolutely that's something that the students can and should do if they want that experience. Sometimes there are things within a complex high stakes case where we have to think about who is the right person to do this, let's say a cross-examination or a closing argument. And sometimes when we're thinking about that, it may be that it's the clinical supervisor who's the right person to do that particular part of a case. But the student is very well suited to do something else. And that's kind of how cases go in general when you're working on cases as a team. Like you really want to think about who who's the strongest person to do this particular thing, and who would fit in better in another part of the case. So I think we're always thinking about that question. I would say that I am so impressed with the work that our students can do. And I truly feel like part of it and part of giving them this high responsibility in cases is doing the work to moot them and prep them to be in the position to do, just as good of a job, if not a better job than practicing lawyers.
Yeah, let me just jump in on this. One thing that I've really been impressed by with our clinical faculty, and what makes the job, to be honest, really difficult, especially with the solo practitioner clinics, is the students have an academic calendar of like they're available basically between the second week of the quarter after they figured out their
Mm-hmm.
classes and their schedule, but then then it gets close to finals and they have to sort of slow down on their clinical work to study, to get ready for finals, take those finals, go off for winter break or spring break. And the clients might have issues that come up at any time. So if
Mm-hmm.
you talk to, for instance, Nicole Hallett runs our immigrants rights clinic. Right now, she has 50 clients at a time or something. I can't remember the exact number, but some huge number. And some of them are being in cases or in deportation hearings or whatever it is that does not just sort of neatly fit into the confines of the academic year, which means that she's just litigating those cases, sometimes in
Yeah.
partnership with other organizations and other legal aid societies. But the faculty keep working on the cases throughout. The cases don't go away, even if the students might come in out along the way.
Yeah. And many judges, when I mention the academic calendar, they look at me like, and
Yeah, right. I'm sure. Yes. Can we get this trial done before
yeah,
finals? Is not
well,
always the most persuasive argument. Yeah.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Are there ways to connect or better connect? Actually, we have two different questions on connections. I'm going to ask both at the same time. One is better ways to connect with other parts of the university, the business
Hmm.
school, engineering, other policy school, et cetera. And one is ways to connect with the local community, nonprofits, legal aid, et cetera. Can you tell us
Hmm.
some ways that we already connect with these other parts of
Yeah.
either the university or the community, and then ways that we might um, do better on this front?
Yeah. Um, so I think that many of our clinics are very connected to advocacy organizations in Chicago, especially those of us who are in these solo practitioner clinics, where we really look to people who are doing this work in the community as as resources, as being people who can share with our students what their organization is doing. So I will say for myself, I have close relationships with people at the Cook County Public Defender's Office, some of whom sometimes speak to my students about how they approach advocacy, which I think is a really important perspective. And then I really love doing cases with community organizations, or we're thinking through connections that we have with them, because it means that you're able to learn more about the community and how legal help can be helpful. Sometimes I think as lawyers we don't really or we don't think as much about like our place in communities. We think of ourselves as we can come in and help people, and sometimes we don't actually know what people want. So I think having those conversations, figuring out what's happening on the ground is really important. In my clinic, there's a really amazing restorative justice nonprofit called Precious Blood Ministry for Reconciliation. We have a very close connection to them. They have kids, youth around Chicago on the South Side that do program with them and work with them. And sometimes that's how we get case referrals. And I think ultimately it helps us do better work because we have a sense of who our client is and their connections to these community organizations. I think we can always do a better job of making those connections. I think lawyers can sometimes be very we're busy and we're siloed and we have a focus. I have to get this brief done, or I have to I have a big hearing or whatever. So I think it's exploring different ways both within the university, and sometimes that's faculty being involved in university-wide committees or groups, or just reaching out and trying to figure out who else at the university is doing the work. And I think those often lead to bigger connections and productive connections for clinical faculty, clients, and students.
Yeah, let me say a few points on this topic of the connections. So first, I think at the sort of the highest levels of our university leadership, the board of trustees, the president, the provost, they know about our clinical program. They know about the different types of clinics that we have, some of the faculty members, what it is that we do. But one thing I've learned in my role over the last year is not all members of our community do know. And I've been in meetings with university leadership, not that highest level that really does have insight into what we do, where people have said things to me like, wouldn't it be great if we could find a way for the university to do something for Southside businesses? And then I stop and say, let me tell you what we're doing for Southside business. We have 2 clinics, students, projects. We're all over these things. And then the same thing when people say, oh, what can we do for the youths of the South Side and to like find opportunities for them. And they're like, well, we've got this clinic, that program, et cetera. And so I think that the clinics have really been not just an important way that we've made an impact for our law school, our students, and our clients. I think it's one of the primary ways that the University of Chicago gives back to our community. And not that other parts of the university don't have programs too, but the clinics are really like a resource intensive, high stakes way that we're trying to contribute to our surroundings. And that has been fantastic. Now, one other thing on the connections, I do think individual clinics connect with different parts of the university for their work. So I know that, for instance, Mark Templeton, who runs our Abrams Environmental Law Clinic, is connected deeply with the Institute of Climate, and they are like working on things together about climate change. I know that the corporate lab that David and Josh run works with Booth on some of their projects. The innovation clinic also works with Booth and Polsky, and so it's like clinic by clinic, I think, for some of the connections. But of course, these are the kinds of things that I think we can try to improve on. All right, we have time for one more question. The question was, what are ways that alumni can help clinics or get involved? And also a different question, but related, is can we make sure that when we have this clinic reunion next fall, that we invite former clinical faculty, former fellows, as well as the alumni themselves?
Yeah, that's a great point, and we will be sure to do that. I think that we really love connecting with alums, and I think that part of that is doing a better job of being proactive with clinical alums. So I think this reception is part of just trying to bring people together in a more informal way. And I know that, again, this is very clinic by clinic, but some clinics have alumni listservs. My clinic has that, where we're sharing news. And so I think people can hear about the work that that we're doing, which is important. I know that with Craig Futterman's Police Accountability Clinic, that sometimes alums are working on co-counseling cases with him and working on cases with him in their firms or wherever it is that they are. So sometimes those opportunities to actually be litigation partners come up. So I think there are lots of different ways to be engaged, and we want to be more proactive about engaging with the alumni community who were part of clinics.
Yeah. All right. I said that was the last question. We had one that just came in that I do want to answer that's related to the broader engagement, which is, speaking of the university overall, what happens when a clinic takes on a high stake case that gets into a dicey political situation? Is there pressure placed on the clinic or on the university to back off? Let me just briefly say on this, this does in fact happen, and this is something that's occurred in that the clinics have got involved in things where there's political stakes to it. Most notably, Craig Futterman, many of you may have seen the lawsuit against the DHS and the Trump administration that took place here in Chicago in the fall when ICE agents moved to Chicago. And Craig Futterman was part of the lawsuit on First Amendment grounds that were challenging some of those activities. And this was a situation, I mean, up and down our university leadership, people aware of the case. We did not put pressure on Craig to change his strategy, his teaching, filing the case, whatever else. And I think that's a commitment that this school, when we're a value-driven institution, if you imagine the Venn diagram of what it means to be a lawyer and what it means to be the University of Chicago on academic freedom and free expression grounds, the right to represent your clients to me is right at the heart of that Venn diagram. And as a result, it's, to me, a non-negotiable value. And so, Erica and her colleagues pick their cases. They tell me about it to let me know what's going on when we have see each other around the building or at events and things, but they're not pre-clearing, with people for what has to take place. So I think that's an important thing that the University of Chicago has done. Special. All right, there's more questions, and I apologize that we didn't make it through all of them, but thank you. I think Megan might have one more word.
I don't, but thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. Have a great afternoon, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, everyone.